On Christmas Day in the year 800, history witnessed one of its most consequential moments. As snow fell gently outside St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, Pope Leo III approached a kneeling Frankish king and placed upon his head a crown that would echo through a millennium of European history. This was not merely the coronation of Charlemagne as Emperor of the Romans. It was the birth of an institution that would survive plagues, wars, religious schisms, and the rise and fall of countless dynasties. For over 1,000 years, the Holy Roman Empire would stand as Europe's most enduring political entity, a complex tapestry of kingdoms, duchies, bishoprics, and free cities bound together by imperial authority, German tradition, and Catholic faith. From the Baltic Sea to the Mediterranean, from the Rhine to the Carpathians, this empire would shape the destiny of Central Europe while evolving from a powerful medieval monarchy into a loose confederation of sovereign states. But what was this empire that Voltaire famously dismissed as neither holy, nor Roman, nor an empire? How did it survive when other great powers crumbled? And why did it finally collapse under the weight of Napoleon's ambitions? After nearly a millennium of existence, the story of the Holy Roman Empire is one of remarkable adaptation and stubborn persistence, of brilliant emperors and weak rulers, of religious warfare and diplomatic intrigue. It is the story of how medieval institutions could evolve to meet changing circumstances while maintaining their essential character, and how the delicate balance between central authority and local autonomy could both strengthen and ultimately destroy a great political system. Welcome to Ancient Echoes, where we explore the forgotten chapters that shaped our world. Tonight, we journey through the complete history of the Holy Roman Empire, from its glorious beginnings in Charlemagne's court to its quiet dissolution in the shadow of Napoleon's conquest. This is a tale of power and politics, of faith and ambition, of the eternal struggle between unity and diversity that would define European civilization for centuries. The roots of the Holy Roman Empire stretch back to the turbulent 8th century, when the great Frankish king Charles, known to history as Charlemagne, stood as the last hope for Christian unity in Western Europe. The collapse of the Western Roman Empire 3 centuries earlier had left a power vacuum that barbarian kingdoms, Muslim conquests, and Byzantine ambitions all sought to fill. Into this chaos stepped the Franks, a Germanic people who had embraced Christianity and Roman administrative practices while maintaining their warrior traditions. Charlemagne's empire was vast beyond anything Western Europe had seen since the fall of Rome, stretching from the Pyrenees to the Elbe River, from the English Channel to the Alps. It encompassed modern-day France, Germany, the Low Countries, and much of Italy. This was more than territorial conquest. It was a conscious attempt to recreate the Roman Empire under Christian auspices, to unite the fractured lands of Western Christendom under a single crown. The coronation ceremony itself was layered with symbolism and political calculation. Pope Leo III, facing serious accusations from Roman nobles, desperately needed a powerful protector. Charlemagne, having conquered the Lombard kingdom and established Frankish hegemony over much of Italy, possessed both the military strength and the pious reputation necessary to serve as the church's champion. Yet contemporary sources suggest that Charlemagne was surprised by the coronation, claiming he would never have entered the basilica had he known the Pope's intention. Whether genuine or calculated, this protestation highlighted the delicate balance between secular and ecclesiastical authority that would define imperial politics for centuries. The emperor controlled temporal power, but the Pope possessed the spiritual authority to legitimize that power. This partnership, sometimes cooperative, often contentious, would become the central dynamic of medieval European politics. The administrative genius of Charlemagne's empire lay in its synthesis of Roman bureaucratic traditions with Frankish personal loyalty. The missi dominici, royal envoys dispatched throughout the empire, served as the emperor's eyes and ears, ensuring compliance with imperial directives while adapting central policies to local conditions. The palace school at Aachen became a magnet for scholars from across the known world, creating the Carolingian Renaissance that preserved classical learning while developing new forms of art, literature, and law. The famous Carolingian minuscule script, developed in the scriptoria of Aachen and Tours, standardized written communication throughout the empire, while preserving countless classical texts that might otherwise have been lost. The curriculum established by Alcuin of York, Charlemagne's chief advisor on educational matters, created a shared intellectual foundation that transcended regional boundaries and linguistic differences. But Charlemagne's empire carried within it the seeds of its own dissolution. Frankish inheritance law demanded the division of kingdoms among royal sons, making the unity achieved by the great emperor inherently temporary. The Treaty of Verdun in 843, which divided Charlemagne's inheritance among his three grandsons, created the fault lines that would eventually produce France and Germany as separate political entities. Louis the German received the eastern portion, the Germanic territories beyond the Rhine, that would become the heartland of the future Holy Roman Empire. This East Frankish kingdom faced unique challenges that would shape its distinctive character. Unlike the more Romanized Western territories, the eastern regions contained numerous Germanic tribes that had only recently been incorporated into the Frankish sphere. The Saxons, Bavarians, Swabians and Franconians maintained strong tribal identities that resisted centralized authority. The gradual dissolution of Carolingian authority in the East Frankish kingdom created opportunities for ambitious nobles to assert greater independence. The concept of feudalism, with its emphasis on personal bonds between lord and vassal, began to replace the more centralized Carolingian administrative system. This decentralization would become a defining characteristic of German political development, distinguishing it from the more centralized monarchies emerging in France and England. The death of Louis the Child in 911 marked the end of Carolingian rule in the East Frankish kingdom, and the beginning of a new phase in German political development. The German nobles, faced with a choice between accepting West Frankish suzerainty or selecting their own king, chose Conrad I, Duke of Franconia, as their ruler. Conrad's turbulent reign revealed the challenges facing any attempt to restore royal authority over the powerful stem duchies, while defending against Magyar raids that devastated the eastern territories. The moment that would reshape German destiny came with Conrad's deathbed recommendation that the crown pass to Henry, Duke of Saxony. This choice reflected both political pragmatism and recognition that effective kingship required military prowess above noble birth. Henry I, known as Henry the Fowler, brought to the German throne a power base in the militarized frontier regions that had borne the brunt of Magyar attacks, and a practical understanding that royal authority must be built upon military success rather than inherited legitimacy. Henry's systematic approach to strengthening the kingdom revealed sophisticated strategic thinking that would become characteristic of Saxon rule. He constructed fortified towns throughout his territories, reorganized the army along more professional lines, and negotiated temporary truces with external enemies to consolidate internal control. His defeat of the Magyars at the Battle of Riad in 93 demonstrated that these nomadic warriors, despite their superior mobility and archery skills, could be overcome through disciplined infantry and coordinated cavalry tactics. But Henry's greatest achievement was not military victory, but the establishment of institutional foundations that his son could build upon. The Saxon kings understood that German royal authority required not just military success, but also the careful cultivation of ecclesiastical support and the gradual subordination of the stem duchies to royal control. Otto I inherited his father's throne in 96, with a clear vision of German potential that extended far beyond his predecessor's achievements. The young monarch's coronation at Aachen deliberately evoked Carolingian precedent, but Otto's conception of royal authority was far more ambitious. He envisioned a restored empire that would unite Germany, Italy, and eventually the entire Christian world under Saxon leadership. The early years of Otto's reign witnessed a series of rebellions that tested both his resolve and his political acumen. His younger brother Henry's conspiracy with several dukes forced Otto to demonstrate that Saxon military prowess could overcome numerical disadvantages through superior tactics and leadership. The suppression of these rebellions eliminated potential rivals, while providing justification for the confiscation of rebel territories and their redistribution to loyal supporters. Otto's ecclesiastical policy represented perhaps his most innovative contribution to medieval governance. The Reichskirchen system, the imperial church system, transformed German bishops and abbots into royal officials, while maintaining their spiritual independence. Unlike secular nobles who could pass their territories to their heirs, ecclesiastical leaders remained dependent on royal appointment and could not establish hereditary dynasties. This created a loyal administrative class that could govern territories and lead armies while remaining fundamentally dependent on imperial favor. The Battle of Lechfeld on August 10, 955 marked the culmination of Otto's military preparations against the Magyar threat and established his reputation as the greatest warrior king of his generation. The Hungarian forces led by Bulcsú and Lehel had penetrated deep into Bavaria, besieging Augsburg and threatening to devastate the entire region. Otto's response demonstrated both strategic acumen and personal courage as he assembled a multinational army that included not only German forces but also contingents from Bohemia and other allied territory. The battle itself unfolded on the plains south of Augsburg, where Otto's heavy cavalry proved decisive against the traditionally mobile Magyar forces. The engagement began with the Magyars employing their characteristic feigned retreat tactics, attempting to draw the German forces into a disorganized pursuit. Otto's disciplined response, maintaining formation while gradually advancing, prevented the enemy from exploiting their mobility advantages and set up the decisive moment when German heavy cavalry charged the Magyar center while simultaneously enveloping their flank. The victory at Lechfeld transformed Otto from a regional German king into a European hero whose reputation extended throughout Christendom. More importantly, it eliminated the primary external threat to German security while providing the military prestige necessary to pursue imperial ambitions in Italy. Otto's imperial coronation in St. Peter's Basilica on February 2, 1962, represented the culmination of his political and military achievements while establishing the institutional framework that would govern German-Italian relations for centuries. Pope John XII, facing threats from Berengar of Italy, had appealed to Otto for protection, offering the imperial crown in exchange for military support. The ceremony consciously evoked Charlemagne's coronation, with Otto receiving the same crown and imperial regalia that had adorned his Carolingian predecessor. Yet this restoration of imperial dignity carried different implications than its 8th century precedent. Otto's empire rested upon German rather than Frankish foundations, and the relationship between emperor and pope had evolved considerably since Charlemagne's time. The Ottonian conception of imperial authority emphasized the emperor's role as protector of the church while maintaining German political independence from papal interference. The Italian peninsula presented both opportunities and challenges that would define imperial policy for centuries. The wealthy Lombard cities, with their advanced commercial economies and sophisticated urban institutions, offered resources that could support imperial ambitions throughout Europe. But these same cities had developed traditions of independence that made them resistant to external authority, whether imperial or papal. Otto's intervention in papal politics established precedents that would generate conflicts throughout the medieval period. His deposition of Pope John XII in 9063 for moral and political reasons demonstrated imperial authority over ecclesiastical affairs, while creating dangerous precedents for future church-state conflict. The installation of Pope Leo VIII as John's replacement showed that imperial power could determine papal succession when backed by sufficient military force. The Ottonian Renaissance that flourished under imperial patronage differed significantly from its Carolingian predecessor in both scope and character. While Charlemagne's cultural revival had emphasized the preservation and transmission of classical learning, the Ottonian court focused more heavily on the integration of Christian and imperial ideology. The magnificent illuminated manuscripts produced in Ottonian scriptoria combined Byzantine artistic influences with Germanic decorative traditions to create a distinctive imperial style that celebrated both Christian piety and temporal authority. The cathedral complex at Magdeburg, established by Otto I as the center of German missionary activity among the Slavs, exemplified this synthesis of religious and political objectives. The massive structure, with its distinctive westwork and elaborate sculptural programs, demonstrated how imperial patronage could create lasting monuments to both religious devotion and political authority. The cathedral's role as the burial place of Otto I and his wife Edith symbolized the dynastic aspirations that drove imperial policy. Otto II's accession in 9073 marked the beginning of a more aggressive imperial policy that sought to extend Ottonian authority throughout the Mediterranean world. The young emperor's marriage to Theophane, a Byzantine princess, created diplomatic connections that provided opportunities for expansion into southern Italy, while simultaneously generating conflicts with Islamic forces based in Sicily. The Battle of Stilo in 9082 revealed the limitations of imperial military power when confronted with determined resistance in unfamiliar terrain. Otto II's army, advancing into Calabria to challenge Muslim control of southern Italy, encountered Saracen forces that employed tactical flexibility and local knowledge to devastating effect. The emperor's narrow escape from the battlefield, achieved only through the sacrifice of his personal guard, demonstrated the personal risks that imperial ambitions entailed while highlighting the practical limitations of German military power in Mediterranean conditions. Otto III's minority and subsequent reign represented perhaps the most ambitious attempt to realize the universal character of imperial authority. The young emperor's education, supervised by his mother Theophane and his grandmother Adelaide, combined German political traditions with Byzantine ceremonial practices and classical learning. His court at Rome, established in deliberate imitation of ancient imperial precedent, attracted scholars and artists from throughout Europe, while promoting an ideology of renovation imperii, the renewal of the empire. The emperor's personal motto, Renovation Imperii Romanorum, reflected his determination to restore not merely the political structure of ancient Rome, but its cultural and spiritual authority as well. His establishment of new administrative institutions, his patronage of learning and the arts, and his systematic efforts to reform ecclesiastical discipline all served this larger vision of imperial renewal. But Otto III's premature death in 1002 at the age of 21 eliminated the most promising attempt to realize universal imperial authority, while creating a succession crisis that would test the institutional foundations of Ottonian rule. The emperor's death without an heir precipitated struggles among various claimants that revealed both the strengths and weaknesses of the imperial system that had been developed during the previous century. The transition from Ottonian to Salian rule occurred smoothly in 1024, when Conrad II, great-great-grandson of Otto I through the female line, ascended to the German throne. Conrad's election by the German princes demonstrated the effectiveness of the institutional frameworks established by his predecessors, as the succession process proceeded without the civil wars that had characterized earlier dynastic transitions. The new emperor's Salian origins, derived from his ancestral holdings in Franconia, would give the dynasty its name and establish a new center of imperial power in the Middle Rhine region. Conrad II's reign marked a decisive shift toward more aggressive imperial expansion and centralization. His conquest of the Kingdom of Burgundy in 1032-134 added vast territory stretching from the Jura Mountains to the Mediterranean coast, significantly expanding the empire's geographical scope and economic resources. The Burgundian acquisition brought wealthy commercial cities like Lyon and Arles under imperial control, while establishing German influence over crucial alpine passes that connected northern and southern Europe. The systematic integration of Burgundy demonstrated sophisticated understanding of regional differences, as Conrad maintained existing legal traditions and local customs while gradually introducing German administrative practice. The Burgundian nobility's acceptance of German rule, achieved through careful negotiation and the preservation of traditional privileges, created a model for imperial expansion that emphasized accommodation rather than conquest. Conrad's Italian policy proved equally successful, though it required constant military intervention to maintain imperial authority. His campaigns against the rebellious Archbishop Aribert of Milan in 1037-1038 established important precedents for imperial jurisdiction over ecclesiastical disputes. The Constitution de Feudis, issued during this conflict, codified feudal relationships throughout the empire and protected the rights of lesser nobles against arbitrary actions by their superiors. This legislation represented the first systematic attempt to regulate feudal obligations on an empire-wide basis, creating legal frameworks that would influence European feudalism for centuries. Henry III inherited a significantly strengthened empire when he succeeded his father. The young emperor's education had been carefully supervised to prepare him for the complex demands of imperial governance, and his early actions demonstrated both political acumen and military competence. Henry's coronation procession through Germany and Italy in 1046-1047 showcased imperial power, while allowing him to assess local conditions and establish personal relationships with key nobles and ecclesiastics throughout his domain. The Synod of Sutri in 1046 represented the pinnacle of imperial authority over the church during the Salian period. Henry III's deposition of three rival papal claimants and his appointment of Clements as pope demonstrated the emperor's capacity to resolve ecclesiastical disputes through decisive action. The Synod's proceedings, conducted with careful attention to canonical procedures, established precedents for imperial intervention in papal elections while maintaining the appearance of ecclesiastical legitimacy. The development of the ministerial system under Henry III transformed the social and political structure of the empire in ways that would have lasting consequence. These unfree knights, bound to imperial service through personal oaths rather than feudal obligations, provided the emperor with a loyal military and administrative class that owed its status entirely to royal favor. Unlike traditional feudal nobles who inherited their positions and maintained independent power bases, the ministeriales depended completely on imperial patronage for their wealth and status. The ministeriales typically emerged from the ranks of skilled craftsmen, merchants or minor nobles who demonstrated exceptional competence in military or administrative affairs. Their unfree legal status paradoxically became a source of strength rather than weakness, as it freed them from competing loyalties to local lords while binding them directly to the emperor. Many ministeriales accumulated substantial wealth through their imperial service, establishing dynasties that would play crucial roles in later imperial history. Henry III's death in 1056 left the empire in the hands of his 6-year-old son, Henry III, creating a regency crisis that would have profound consequences for imperial authority. The Empress Agnes of Poitou, despite her noble birth and political connections, lacked the military reputation and personal relationships necessary to maintain effective control over the empire's fractious nobility. The Regency period witnessed the gradual erosion of imperial authority as powerful dukes and bishops asserted greater independence from central control. The kidnapping of the young Henry III by Archbishop Anno of Cologne in 1062 demonstrated the vulnerability of imperial authority during the Regency period. Anno's, supported by several German princes and ostensibly aimed at rescuing the empire from the Empress Mother's allegedly incompetent governance, revealed more personal ambitions as the Archbishop used his control over the emperor to advance his own political agenda and enrich his supporters. Henry V's assumption of personal rule in 1065 coincided with the emergence of reform movements within the church that would challenge traditional relationships between secular and ecclesiastical authority. The Gregorian Reform, named after Pope Gregory VII, but encompassing broader currents of ecclesiastical renewal, sought to eliminate lay interference in church affairs while asserting papal supremacy over all Christian rulers. These reforms directly threatened the Reichskirchen system that had provided the foundation for imperial governance since Otto I's reign. The immediate cause of the investiture controversy emerged from competing claims over the appointment of bishops and abbots throughout the empire. Henry V's practice of investing ecclesiastical officials with ring and staff, symbols of their spiritual authority, had been accepted by previous popes as a legitimate expression of imperial patronage. However, Gregory VII's papal bull Dictatus Papae in 1075 explicitly condemned lay investiture as simony, while asserting the pope's authority to depose emperors who violated church law. This declaration represented a fundamental challenge to the theoretical foundations of imperial authority. The emperor's role as protector of the church had traditionally included the right to appoint ecclesiastical officials and oversee church affairs. Gregory VII's reforms sought to eliminate this imperial prerogative while establishing papal supremacy over temporal rulers, a complete reversal of the relationship that had existed since Charlemagne's time. The conflict escalated rapidly when Henry V appointed his own candidate as Archbishop of Milan in direct defiance of papal prohibition. Gregory VII's response, excommunicating the emperor and releasing his subjects from their oaths of allegiance, created an unprecedented crisis that threatened the very existence of imperial authority. The Pope's actions found support among German nobles who had long resented Henry's attempts to strengthen central authority at their expense. Henry V's journey to Canossa in January 1077 became one of the most dramatic episodes in medieval history. The emperor's decision to cross the Alps in winter, accompanied by only a small retinue, demonstrated both his desperate circumstances and his political acumen. The 3-day penance outside the walls of Canossa Castle, where Henry stood barefoot in the snow while Gregory VII deliberated his fate, created powerful imagery that would resonate throughout European culture for centuries. The emperor's apparent humiliation achieved its intended political objective by forcing the Pope to grant absolution and thereby undermining the rebellion of German nobles who had justified their actions through Henry's excommunicated state. But the reconciliation at Canossa proved temporary, as both emperor and pope continued to pursue incompatible objectives. Henry V's return to Germany and his subsequent military victories over rebellious nobles restored much of his political position, while Gregory VII's continued support for anti-imperial forces led to renewed conflict. The emperor's second excommunication in 1080 lacked the dramatic impact of the first, as European opinion had begun to shift against papal interference in secular governance. The climax of the investiture struggle came with Henry I's conquest of Rome in 1084 and his installation of Clement III as Pope. This demonstrated the temporary triumph of imperial authority over papal pretensions, while revealing the complex international dimensions of the church-state conflict. The arrival of Norman forces under Robert Guiscard, who sacked Rome while ostensibly rescuing Gregory VII, showed how local conflicts could escalate into international confrontation. The Concordat of Worms, negotiated between Henry V and Pope Calixtus II in 1122, represented a carefully crafted compromise that preserved essential interests of both parties, while establishing new frameworks for church-state relations. The agreement distinguished between the spiritual and temporal aspects of episcopal office, allowing the Pope to invest bishops with ring and staff while preserving the emperor's right to invest them with secular authority through scepter and land grants. This distinction, though sometimes difficult to maintain in practice, provided theoretical foundations for coexistence between imperial and papal authority. The Concordat's provisions varied significantly between Germany and Italy, reflecting the different political conditions in each region. In Germany, where imperial authority remained strong, bishops would receive secular investiture before spiritual consecration, ensuring their loyalty to the emperor. In Italy and Burgundy, where papal influence was greater, spiritual investiture would precede temporal grant. The election of Conrad III in 1138 marked the beginning of Hohenstaufen rule, a dynasty that would preside over the empire's most glorious and tumultuous period. Conrad's selection by the German princes over Henry the Proud represented a deliberate choice of Swabian leadership over Saxon wealth dominance, creating factional divisions that would plague imperial politics throughout the 12th century. The new emperor's Hohenstaufen origins, derived from the family's ancestral castle in Swabia, established a new geographical center of imperial power, while maintaining traditional claims to Carolingian legitimacy. Frederick Barbarossa's accession to the imperial throne in 1152 marked the beginning of the Hohenstaufen Golden Age, a period characterized by unprecedented territorial expansion, administrative innovation, and cultural achievement. The new emperor's election at Frankfurt demonstrated the German prince's confidence in his ability to restore imperial prestige, while managing the complex factional divisions that had plagued his predecessor's reign. Frederick's physical appearance, described by contemporary chroniclers as tall and powerfully built with a distinctive red beard that earned him his nickname, projected an image of martial prowess that would prove crucial to his political success. Frederick's administrative innovations extended far beyond his Italian territories, transforming the governance of the empire's German heartland through systematic legal and bureaucratic reforms. The establishment of imperial cities throughout Swabia and Franconia created centers of royal authority that could balance the power of traditional noble families while generating revenues through commercial activities. These urban foundations, typically located at strategic river crossings or mountain passes, developed into thriving commercial centers that enhanced imperial resources while providing military bases for royal campaigns. The emperor's first Italian campaign in 1154-1155 established the pattern of military intervention that would define his relationship with the peninsula for the next 3 decades. Frederick's march south of the Alps with a substantial German army demonstrated his determination to restore imperial authority over the wealthy Lombard cities that had grown increasingly independent during the investiture conflict. The campaign's initial success, culminating in his imperial coronation by Pope Adrian III in Rome, masked underlying tensions that would soon erupt into open warfare. The Diet of Roncaglia, convened in November 1158, assembled legal scholars from the University of Bologna to define imperial prerogatives throughout the Italian territory. The resulting constitution established the emperor's authority to collect taxes, appoint officials, and exercise judicial supremacy over all imperial territories, creating legal frameworks that justified extensive intervention in local affairs. The Siege of Milan in 1158-1162 demonstrated both the potential and limitations of imperial military power. Frederick's army, reinforced by contingents from allied Italian cities and German nobles, completely encircled Milan's formidable fortifications while constructing elaborate siege works designed to starve the defenders into submission. The siege's duration, lasting nearly 4 years with intermittent truces, revealed the enormous resources required to overcome well-fortified urban centers defended by motivated population. Milan's eventual surrender in March 1162 provided Frederick with his greatest triumph while simultaneously creating conditions for future rebellion. The emperor's decision to raise the city's walls and scatter its population throughout the surrounding countryside demonstrated his determination to eliminate centers of resistance to imperial authority. The destruction of Milan's cathedral and civic buildings, witnessed by representatives from throughout northern Italy, served as a powerful warning to other cities contemplating resistance. The formation of the Lombard League in 1167 marked the beginning of organized resistance to imperial authority that would challenge Frederick's Italian ambitions for the remainder of his reign. The alliance, initially comprising 16 cities including Milan, Cremona and Bergamo, represented unprecedented cooperation between traditionally competitive urban communities. The League's military organization, based on contingents provided by member cities and coordinated through elected commanders, created flexible defensive capabilities that could respond rapidly to imperial threats. The Battle of Legnano on May 29, 1176 represented the decisive confrontation between imperial and communal forces that would determine the future of northern Italy. Frederick's army, composed primarily of German heavy cavalry supported by Italian allies, encountered the Lombard League's forces on the plain northwest of Milan. The battle's outcome hinged on the effectiveness of the League's infantry formations, equipped with long pikes and crossbows, against the traditional charge of imperial knights. The imperial defeat at Legnano forced Frederick to fundamentally reconsider his Italian strategy while acknowledging the practical limitations of military solutions to political problems. The emperor's subsequent negotiations with the Lombard League, culminating in the Peace of Constance in 1183, represented a sophisticated compromise that preserved essential imperial prerogatives while granting substantial autonomy to the Italian city. Frederick II's emergence as Holy Roman Emperor in 1220 marked the beginning of the most remarkable reign in medieval European history. Raised in the cosmopolitan court of Palermo, where Christian, Muslim and Jewish scholars collaborated in preserving and transmitting classical knowledge, Frederick possessed intellectual foundations that distinguished him from all his contemporaries. His education in this unique environment provided him with a worldview that transcended traditional medieval boundaries while fostering innovations in governance, law, and cultural expression. The constitutions of Melfi, promulgated in 1231, represented Frederick II's most significant contribution to medieval jurisprudence and administrative practice. These comprehensive legal codes, developed through collaboration between Christian and Muslim scholars, established unified legal frameworks within the Sicilian kingdom, while incorporating advanced concepts of royal authority derived from Roman law. The constitution's provisions for centralized administration, professional bureaucracy, and systematic taxation created governmental structures that surpassed contemporary European practices in their sophistication and efficiency. Frederick's conflicts with the papacy reached unprecedented intensity during the reign of Pope Gregory IX, whose determination to assert papal supremacy over temporal rulers directly challenged the emperor's conception of imperial authority. The Pope's excommunication of Frederick in 1227, ostensibly for delaying his departure on crusade, actually reflected deeper disagreements about the relationship between secular and ecclesiastical power. The emperor's subsequent crusade to the Holy Land, conducted while under papal ban, demonstrated his ability to achieve diplomatic success through negotiation rather than military conquest. The Treaty of Jaffa, negotiated between Frederick II and Sultan al-Kamil in 1229, represented one of the most remarkable diplomatic achievements of the medieval period. The agreement, reached through extensive correspondence and personal meetings between the emperor and sultan, restored Christian control over Jerusalem, Bethlehem, and Nazareth, without the massive bloodshed that had characterized previous crusades. Frederick's self-coronation as King of Jerusalem in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre created a powerful symbolic statement about imperial authority while generating controversy throughout Christian Europe. The emperor's decision to crown himself, necessitated by his excommunicated status and the absence of ecclesiastical officials willing to perform the ceremony, demonstrated his rejection of papal claims to supremacy over temporal rulers. The University of Naples, founded by Frederick II in 1224, represented the emperor's commitment to educational innovation while serving practical needs for trained administrators throughout his territory. The institution's curriculum, combining traditional liberal arts with practical subjects such as law and medicine, produced graduates capable of staffing the sophisticated bureaucracy required for effective imperial governance. The university's location in the imperial capital provided students with opportunities to observe governmental operations while ensuring that the institution remained responsive to imperial needs. Frederick's patronage of scientific and cultural activities during his reign, contributed to intellectual developments that would influence European thought for centuries. The emperor's personal interests in mathematics, astronomy, and natural philosophy led him to sponsor translations of classical texts while supporting original research by scholars from throughout the known world. His correspondence with learned men from Christian, Muslim, and Jewish communities demonstrated intellectual curiosity that transcended religious boundaries while advancing human knowledge in multiple disciplines. The emperor's treatise De Arte Venandi cum Avibus exemplified his approach to empirical observation and systematic analysis of natural phenomena. The work's detailed descriptions of bird behavior, based on extensive personal observation and experimentation, challenged traditional authorities while establishing new standards for scientific accuracy. The manuscript's elaborate illustrations depicting various species of birds and hunting techniques demonstrated the emperor's commitment to combining artistic expression with scientific documentation. Frederick's conflicts with Pope Innocent I, who succeeded Gregory IX in 1220-43, reached levels of intensity that threatened the fundamental structure of medieval European society. The Pope's deposition of the emperor at the Council of Lyon in 1225, declaring him a heretic and releasing his subjects from their oaths of allegiance, represented the most extreme assertion of papal authority over temporal rulers in medieval history. Frederick II's death in 1250 marked the beginning of the end for Hohenstaufen power, as his successors proved unable to maintain the complex political and military arrangements that had sustained imperial authority throughout his reign. The emperor's son Conrad III, who inherited both the imperial title and the Sicilian kingdom, faced immediate challenges from papal forces and rebellious nobles who sought to exploit the transition period to advance their own interests. The death of Conrad IV in 1254 plunged the Holy Roman Empire into its most severe constitutional crisis since the investiture conflicts of the 11th century. The young king's demise in Naples, amid whispers of poisoning by papal agents, left behind a 2-year-old son, Conradin, whose minority and precarious position in Sicily rendered him incapable of asserting meaningful authority over the vast imperial territories. The Electoral College's deliberations revealed the fundamental tensions that had been building within the empire's political structure for decades. The 7 prince-electors, the archbishops of Mainz, Cologne and Trier, the King of Bohemia, the Duke of Saxony, the Margrave of Brandenburg, and the Count Palatine of the Rhine, possessed vastly different interests and territorial concerns that made consensus difficult to achieve. The election of Richard of Cornwall in 1257 represented a compromise solution that satisfied neither the empire's need for effective leadership nor the electors' desire for a malleable ruler. Richard, brother of Henry III of England and one of the wealthiest men in Europe due to his Cornish tin mines, possessed the financial resources necessary to purchase electoral support, while lacking the territorial base within the empire that might threaten princely independence. The simultaneous election of Alfonso X of Castile by a rival faction of electors created an unprecedented situation in imperial history, as 2 legitimate claimants possessed equal legal standing to the imperial throne. Alfonso's candidacy, supported by the archbishops of Cologne and Trier along with several secular princes, reflected the international dimensions of imperial politics and the growing influence of foreign powers in German affairs. Richard of Cornwall's actual governance of the empire proved sporadic and ineffective, as his primary residence in England and his limited understanding of German political conditions prevented him from establishing meaningful authority over the fractious princes. His 4 visits to Germany between 1257 and 1272 accomplished little beyond ceremonial functions and the collection of taxes from imperial cities, while the real business of governance devolved to local authorities who recognized no superior jurisdiction. Alfonso X's approach to imperial rule proved even more detached from German realities, as the Castilian king never set foot in the empire during his entire reign. His governance consisted primarily of diplomatic correspondence and the dispatch of representatives who lacked both the authority and resources necessary to implement royal policies. The Castilian court's preoccupation with the Reconquista and Alfonso's scholarly pursuits left little time or attention for the complex demands of imperial administration. The practical consequences of this dual monarchy became apparent as local conflicts erupted throughout the empire without effective royal intervention. The Rhineland cities formed defensive leagues to protect their commercial interests against predatory nobles, while territorial princes expanded their domains through conquest and marriage alliances that ignored traditional feudal obligations. The period's most significant territorial changes occurred in the eastern regions, where Ottokar II of Bohemia emerged as the most successful competitor for the Austrian inheritance. His establishment of effective control over Austria, Styria, and eventually Carinthia and Carniola created a Bohemian power bloc that stretched from the Sudetes to the Adriatic, fundamentally altering the balance of power within the empire. The impact of the interregnum on imperial cities proved particularly significant, as these communities found themselves forced to develop autonomous defensive and administrative capabilities in the absence of royal protection. The Rhenish League, formed in 1254 and eventually encompassing over 70 cities, created unprecedented mechanisms for interurban cooperation that included common coinage, standardized weights and measures, and coordinated military responses to external threats. The election of Rudolf of Habsburg in 1273 represented a carefully calculated compromise that balanced the electors' desire for effective leadership with their determination to preserve their recently acquired autonomy. Rudolf's selection over more prominent candidates such as Ottokar II of Bohemia reflected the electors' preference for a ruler whose power base, while substantial, remained limited enough to avoid threatening their independence. Rudolf's coronation at Aachen in October 1273 marked the formal end of the Great Interregnum, though the new king faced enormous challenges in restoring imperial authority after nearly 2 decades of fragmentation. His immediate priorities included the recovery of alienated royal territories, the restoration of imperial justice, and the resolution of territorial disputes that had festered during the interregnum. The confrontation with Ottokar II of Bohemia became Rudolf's most pressing challenge, as the Bohemian king's extensive territorial acquisitions had created a power block that threatened to overshadow royal authority. Ottokar's refusal to perform homage for his Austrian territories, based on his claim that these lands had been acquired through legitimate conquest rather than imperial grant, created a constitutional crisis that required immediate resolution. Rudolf's systematic approach to the Bohemian crisis demonstrated the political and military skills that would characterize his entire reign. His diplomatic efforts to isolate Ottokar through alliances with Hungary and Poland created strategic pressures that complemented his military preparations, while his careful attention to legal justifications maintained support among the German princes. The Battle of Dürnkruth in 1278 eliminated the primary threat to Habsburg authority, while providing Rudolf with the opportunity to reshape the political geography of Central Europe. Ottokar's death during the engagement, fought on the Marchfeld east of Vienna, witnessed the destruction of Bohemian military power through superior tactics and strategic positioning. Rudolf's personal leadership of the decisive cavalry charge, despite his advanced age, demonstrated the martial prowess that had earned him electoral support. The aftermath of Dürnkruth enabled Rudolf to implement territorial arrangements that would establish Habsburg power for centuries. His grant of Austria and Styria to his sons Albert and Rudolf in 1282 created a substantial territorial base that provided the family with resources independent of electoral politics. The privilegium minus, which Rudolf confirmed for the Austrian territories, granted the Habsburgs extensive autonomy within their domains, while maintaining formal recognition of imperial sovereignty. Rudolf's administrative reforms throughout the empire demonstrated his sophisticated understanding of the institutional changes necessary to restore effective royal authority. His systematic recovery of alienated crown lands, achieved through legal proceedings and military pressure, restored substantial revenues to the royal treasury while demonstrating the practical benefits of renewed imperial governance. The assassination of Albert I in 1308 by his nephew John of Swabia created another succession crisis that would bring the Luxembourg dynasty to imperial prominence. The murder, motivated by disputes over territorial inheritance and personal grievances, shocked contemporary observers while demonstrating the persistent violence that characterized medieval political competition. The election of Henry VII of Luxembourg in 1308 represented a significant shift in imperial politics, as the new king brought different priorities and territorial interests to the throne. Henry's background as Count of Luxembourg had provided him with extensive experience in the complex diplomatic and military challenges of governing border territories, while his family's traditional connections to France created new possibilities for imperial foreign policy. Henry VII's Italian expedition of 1310 to 1313 represented the most ambitious attempt to restore imperial authority in the peninsula since Frederick II's campaigns of the previous century. The emperor's decision to revive traditional claims to Lombard sovereignty reflected both personal ambition and genuine belief in the universal character of imperial authority. His army's march across the Alps, supported by Ghibelline allies throughout northern Italy, initially achieved remarkable success in re-establishing imperial control over territories that had been independent for decades. Henry's imperial coronation in Rome in 1312 marked the temporary triumph of his Italian ambitions while generating new conflicts with papal authority and local political factions. The ceremony, conducted in the Lateran Basilica rather than St. Peter's due to security concerns, demonstrated the precarious nature of imperial authority in the papal city, while maintaining essential symbolic elements of imperial legitimacy. The sudden death of Henry VII in 13 Beaumont, the emperor's demise, possibly from malaria contracted during his Italian campaigns, occurred at the moment when his military and diplomatic efforts appeared likely to achieve lasting success. The disputed election of 1314 plunged the Holy Roman Empire into a constitutional crisis that would reshape its political landscape for generations. The simultaneous selection of Louis of Bavaria by one electoral faction and Frederick of Austria by another created an unprecedented situation where two legitimate claimants possessed equal legal standing to the imperial throne. Louis of Bavaria's candidacy drew support from princes who favoured a more decentralised imperial structure that would preserve their recently acquired autonomy. The Bavarian duke's territorial base in southeastern Germany provided substantial military resources while remaining geographically confined enough to avoid threatening the major electoral territories. Frederick of Austria's claim rested on his Habsburg inheritance and the precedent established by his father Albert I's successful reign. The Austrian duke's supporters, led by the ecclesiastical electors, argued that Habsburg territorial consolidation in the southeast provided the empire with necessary stability while maintaining traditional relationships with the papacy. The resulting civil war demonstrated the sophisticated military capabilities that had developed within the empire during the previous century. Both claimants assembled armies that incorporated advanced siege techniques, coordinated cavalry tactics, and innovative use of crossbow formations that reflected the influence of Italian military developments. The Battle of Gamelsdorf in November 1313 provided Louis of Bavaria with his first significant victory, though the engagement's limited scope prevented decisive resolution of the succession dispute. Frederick's personal capture during the battle's final phase eliminated his immediate military threat, while providing Louis with a valuable bargaining chip for future negotiations. The election of Charles IV of Luxembourg in 1347 marked the beginning of a new phase in imperial history, as the Bohemian king brought different priorities and territorial interests to the throne. Charles's background as heir to the Bohemian crown had provided him with extensive experience in the complex diplomatic and administrative challenges of governing Central European territories, while his education in Paris had exposed him to the latest developments in legal and administrative theory. The promulgation of the Golden Bull in 1356 represented Charles IV's most significant contribution to imperial constitutional development, establishing legal frameworks that would govern electoral politics for centuries. The document's comprehensive provisions, developed through extensive consultation with legal scholars and political advisors, addressed the fundamental questions of imperial succession that had generated conflicts throughout the previous century. The Golden Bull's institutional frameworks proved their durability when they survived the transition from Luxembourg to Habsburg rule and continued to function effectively for over 4 centuries. The systematic codification of electoral procedures, territorial arrangements, and administrative practices created institutional stability that enabled the empire to survive future political crises while maintaining its essential character as a confederation of semi-autonomous territories. The electoral college established by the Golden Bull consisted of 7 prince-electors: the archbishops of Mainz, Cologne, and Trier, the King of Bohemia, the Duke of Saxony, the Margrave of Brandenburg, and the Count Palatine of the Rhine. These territories received extensive privileges, including the right to mint coins, levy tolls, and exercise judicial authority within their domains, while their rulers gained precedence over all other imperial nobles. The Golden Bull's provisions for electoral procedures eliminated many of the ambiguities that had generated succession disputes during the previous century. The requirement for a majority vote among the 7 electors, conducted in Frankfurt am Main, created clear legal frameworks for determining imperial succession while preventing the kind of disputed elections that had paralyzed imperial authority during the Great Interregnum. The document's territorial arrangements reflected the complex balance of power that had emerged within the empire during the 14th century. The recognition of electoral territories as indivisible inheritances prevented the fragmentation that had weakened other German principalities, while the establishment of clear succession laws reduced opportunities for disputed claims and civil conflicts. Charles IV's cultural patronage during his reign contributed to an intellectual and artistic renaissance that enhanced imperial prestige throughout Europe. His transformation of Prague into a major European capital, featuring the magnificent St. Vitus Cathedral and the first university in Central Europe, demonstrated how imperial resources could create lasting monuments to both cultural achievement and political authority. The University of Prague, founded in 1348, became a center of learning that attracted students from throughout Europe, while promoting new forms of scholarship that combined traditional theological studies with humanistic learning. The institution's role in preserving and transmitting classical texts, its contributions to the development of Czech literature, and its influence on religious and political thought demonstrated the continuing vitality of imperial cultural patronage. The Electoral College's selection of Albert II of Austria in 1438 marked not merely another dynastic transition, but the beginning of Habsburg dominance that would endure for centuries. Albert's election represented a calculated decision by the German princes, who recognized that the Austrian duke's substantial territorial holdings in the southeast provided the military resources necessary to confront the growing Ottoman threat, while his family's traditional moderation in imperial affairs offered reassurance against excessive centralization. Albert II's brief reign from 1438 to 1439 established crucial precedents for Habsburg rule, despite lasting barely 18 months. The new king's immediate focus on Hungarian affairs, where his marriage to Elizabeth of Luxembourg had provided claims to that kingdom's throne, demonstrated the international dimensions of Habsburg power that would distinguish the dynasty from its predecessors. Albert's sudden death from dysentery in 1439, contracted during his campaign against the Ottomans, created a succession crisis that tested the institutional foundations he had barely begun to establish. His posthumous son Ladislaus, born 4 months after the king's death, inherited claims to Austria, Bohemia and Hungary that could not be effectively exercised during his minority. The Electoral College's selection of Frederick III of Austria in 1440 represented a compromise that preserved Habsburg control, while acknowledging the practical limitations of minor heirs. Frederick's position as head of the senior Habsburg line provided constitutional legitimacy, while his extensive territorial holdings in Styria and Carinthia offered sufficient resources for imperial governance. Frederick III's coronation journey to Rome in 1452 marked the last imperial coronation performed by a pope, though the ceremony's significance extended far beyond its historical uniqueness. The elaborate procession through northern Italy, featuring thousands of participants including German nobles, Italian allies and ecclesiastical dignitaries, demonstrated the continuing prestige of imperial authority while revealing the enormous costs associated with traditional ceremonial obligations. The development of Habsburg marriage diplomacy during Frederick's reign established patterns that would define the dynasty's expansion strategy for centuries. The emperor's systematic cultivation of matrimonial alliances throughout Europe, guided by the principle that others wage war but you, happy Austria, marry, created a network of dynastic connections that provided alternatives to military conquest. The negotiation of his son Maximilian's betrothal to Mary of Burgundy in 1477 represented the culmination of this strategy, bringing the wealthy Burgundian territories into the Habsburg sphere through peaceful means rather than expensive military campaigns. The Burgundian inheritance transformed Habsburg prospects from a regional German power to a European dynasty of the first rank. Maximilian's accession to sole rule in 1493 coincided with the emergence of new challenges that would test Habsburg capabilities throughout Europe. The young king's energetic personality and military ambitions contrasted sharply with his father's cautious approach, leading to more aggressive policies that sought to maximize Habsburg advantages while confronting enemies on multiple fronts. The establishment of the Reichsregiment in 1500, an imperial governing council designed to provide continuity during royal absences, represented a sophisticated attempt to balance imperial authority with the practical demands of governing scattered territories. The council's composition, including representatives from all major electoral and princely families, provided mechanisms for consultation and consensus building that had been absent during previous reigns. Charles V's inheritance in 1519 of the most extensive territorial holdings in European history created unprecedented opportunities and challenges for Habsburg power. The union of Spanish, Austrian, Burgundian and imperial territories under a single ruler provided resources that enabled global expansion while creating administrative complexities that strained existing governmental structures. The election campaign of 1519 revealed the sophisticated financial mechanisms that had developed to support imperial politics during the early 16th century. Charles's victory over Francis I of France required enormous expenditures that were financed through loans from German banking houses, particularly the Fuggers of Augsburg. The resulting debt obligations, secured by revenues from American silver mines and European territorial taxes, created financial relationships that would influence Habsburg policy for decades. Charles V's coronation as Holy Roman Emperor in 1520 marked the culmination of Habsburg territorial consolidation while establishing new precedents for imperial ceremonial. The elaborate festivities in Aachen, attended by representatives from throughout Europe and the Americas, demonstrated the global character of Habsburg power while maintaining traditional elements of imperial ritual. The emperor's confrontation with the Ottoman Empire reached its climax during the siege of Vienna in 1529, when Suleiman the Magnificent's massive army threatened the heart of Habsburg power. The Turkish force, estimated at over 100,000 men, including elite Janissary units and extensive siege artillery, represented the largest military expedition ever launched into Central Europe. The siege's conduct revealed the sophisticated military capabilities that both sides had developed during their prolonged confrontation. The Ottoman army's systematic approach to siege warfare, featuring coordinated artillery bombardments and infantry assaults, demonstrated the advanced tactical methods that had enabled Turkish expansion throughout the Balkans. The defenders' response, utilizing enfilading fire from bastioned positions and coordinated sorties against Turkish siege works, showcased the defensive innovations that European military engineers had developed in response to artillery warfare. The siege's ultimate failure marked the high tide of Ottoman expansion into Central Europe, while establishing Vienna's reputation as the bulwark of Christendom. The Turkish withdrawal in October 1529, prompted by the approach of winter and the failure to achieve decisive breaches in the city's walls, demonstrated the practical limitations of Ottoman military power when confronted with determined resistance and extended supply lines. The development of Habsburg administrative systems during Charles V's reign required innovations that could coordinate governance across multiple continents while maintaining local autonomy. The establishment of separate councils for different territorial groups, including the Council of Castile, the Council of Aragon, and the Council of the Indies, created specialized administrative bodies that could address regional concerns while maintaining imperial coordination. The religious challenges that emerged during Charles's reign, particularly the Protestant Reformation initiated by Martin Luther, created new dimensions of conflict that threatened the fundamental unity of the empire. The emperor's role as defender of Catholic orthodoxy, established through his coronation oath and reinforced by papal expectations, conflicted with the practical needs of governing territories that included substantial Protestant populations. The Peace of Augsburg in 1555 represented Charles's recognition that religious unity could no longer be maintained through imperial authority alone. The settlement's principle of cuius regio, aesuis religio, granted territorial rulers the right to determine their subjects' religious affiliation while establishing legal frameworks for coexistence between Catholic and Protestant authorities. Charles V's abdication in 1556 marked the end of the most ambitious attempt to create universal monarchy in European history while establishing new precedents for Habsburg territorial arrangements. The emperor's division of his territories between his son Philip II, who inherited Spain and its global empire, and his brother Ferdinand I, who received the Austrian lands and the imperial title, created separate Habsburg lines that would pursue different strategies while maintaining dynastic cooperation. The defenestration of Prague on May 23, 1618, marked the violent culmination of religious and constitutional tensions that had been building throughout the Habsburg territory since Ferdinand II's accession to the Bohemian throne. The incident unfolded in the council chamber of Hradčany Castle, where Protestant Bohemian nobles confronted imperial governors over Ferdinand's systematic violation of religious privileges guaranteed by the Letter of Majesty. The dramatic moment when Count Jindřich Matyáš Thurn led the assembled nobles in physically hurling two Catholic officials and their secretary from the castle's third-story window created powerful symbolism that would resonate throughout European Protestant communities while providing immediate justification for armed resistance to Habsburg authority. Ferdinand II's response to the Bohemian Rebellion reflected both his personal commitment to Catholic orthodoxy and his sophisticated understanding of the strategic challenges posed by Protestant resistance. The emperor's immediate appeal to his cousin Philip III of Spain and his brother-in-law Maximilian I of Bavaria demonstrated the international dimensions that German religious conflicts had acquired since the formation of the Catholic League. The formation of the Catholic League army under the command of Johann Tarkles, Count of Tilly, represented the culmination of counter-Reformation military organization. Tilly's forces, assembled from Bavarian, Austrian and Spanish contingents, incorporated tactical innovations derived from decades of warfare in the Netherlands and Italy, while maintaining the disciplined religious motivation that characterized Catholic military culture. The Battle of White Mountain on November 8, 1620, marked the decisive confrontation between Catholic and Protestant forces that would determine the fate of Central European Protestantism for generations. The engagement unfolded on the plateau west of Prague, where Frederick V's hastily assembled army of Bohemian, German and Hungarian forces encountered Tilly's disciplined Catholic coalition. The battle's outcome, determined within 2 hours of initial contact, demonstrated the superior training and coordination that Catholic forces had achieved through systematic military preparation. The Protestant army's rapid collapse, beginning with the flight of Bohemian cavalry and culminating in the complete rout of remaining forces, eliminated organized Protestant resistance in Bohemia while providing Catholic forces with momentum for broader territorial conquests. The systematic re-Catholicization of Bohemia, under Ferdinand II's direction, represented the most comprehensive religious transformation attempted in early modern Europe. The emperor's expulsion of Protestant clergy, closure of Protestant schools, and mandatory conversion requirements for noble families created precedents for religious coercion that would influence Catholic policy throughout the Habsburg territories. The emergence of Christian Varth of Denmark as a major Protestant military leader marked the beginning of the war's second phase. A Scandinavian intervention provided Protestant forces with resources and leadership that had been absent since Frederick V's defeat. The Danish king's substantial military resources, including experienced troops from ongoing Polish wars and revenues from sound tolls, provided Protestant forces with capabilities that had been lacking during the Bohemian phase. Wallenstein's military innovations transformed the character of early modern warfare through systematic application of entrepreneurial principles to military organization. His establishment of a comprehensive supply system based on territorial contributions rather than traditional feudal obligations provided imperial forces with logistical capabilities that could sustain extended campaigns in hostile territory. The Battle of Lutzen on November 16, 1632, eliminated Protestant Europe's most capable military leader while creating new strategic challenges for anti-Habsburg coalitions. The engagement witnessed the Swedish king's personal leadership of a cavalry charge that achieved tactical victory while costing his life, demonstrating both the effectiveness of Swedish military methods and the personal risks that characterized early modern battlefield leadership. The French military intervention revealed the international dimensions that the German religious conflict had acquired by the 1630s. The coordination of French, Swedish, and German Protestant forces created unprecedented coalition warfare capabilities that could challenge Habsburg power throughout Central Europe, while demonstrating the economic foundations of early modern warfare. The Peace of Westphalia, negotiated simultaneously at Münster and Osnabrück during 1646-1648, represented the most comprehensive attempt to resolve the complex political, religious, and territorial issues that had generated 3 decades of warfare. The settlement's religious provisions established new legal frameworks that would govern church-state relations throughout Central Europe for centuries, while its constitutional provisions fundamentally restructured the Holy Roman Empire's political organization. The Peace of Westphalia fundamentally transformed the Holy Roman Empire from a functioning medieval monarchy into a loose confederation of virtually sovereign states, each jealously guarding its territorial prerogatives while maintaining only nominal allegiance to the imperial crown. The settlement's recognition of territorial sovereignty had effectively neutered imperial authority, reducing the emperor to little more than a ceremonial figurehead whose actual power rarely extended beyond his hereditary Austrian domains. The imperial diet, relocated permanently to Regensburg in 1663, epitomized this new political reality. What had once been an assembly capable of decisive action became a perpetual diplomatic conference, where representatives debated endlessly over procedural matters, while avoiding substantive decisions that might threaten their master's autonomy. The emergence of Prussia as a major European power during the late 17th and early 18th centuries created the most significant challenge to Austrian hegemony within the empire since the medieval conflicts between Pope and Emperor. The Hohenzollern dynasty's systematic territorial consolidation, beginning with the acquisition of East Prussia in 1618, and culminating in the royal coronation of Frederick V, created a northern German power bloc that could rival Habsburg influence while maintaining nominal subordination to imperial authority. Frederick II's invasion of Silesia in December 1740, launched immediately after Maria Theresa's accession to the Habsburg throne, demonstrated Prussian willingness to challenge Austrian authority through direct military action. The rapid conquest of Silesia's major fortresses provided Prussia with substantial territorial gains, while demonstrating the effectiveness of military modernization. The 7 Years' War transformed the struggle between Austria and Prussia into a global conflict that encompassed European, American, and Asian theaters. Frederick II's preemptive invasion of Saxony in August 1756 demonstrated Prussian determination to maintain strategic initiative while preventing the formation of hostile coalitions. The French Revolutionary Wars, beginning in 1792, subjected the Holy Roman Empire to unprecedented challenges that would ultimately prove fatal to its continued existence. The revolutionary ideology emanating from France, with its emphasis on popular sovereignty and national self-determination, directly challenged the feudal and dynastic principles that had governed German political life for centuries. The systematic French occupation of the Rhineland during 1794-1795 eliminated imperial authority over territories that had been integral to the empire since Charlemagne's reign. The revolutionary administration's implementation of French legal codes, administrative procedures, and educational systems created new forms of governance that directly challenged traditional imperial institutions. The emergence of Napoleon Bonaparte as first consul in 1799 transformed French policy toward the Holy Roman Empire from revolutionary expansion to systematic territorial reorganization. Napoleon's sophisticated understanding of German political conditions enabled him to exploit the empire's internal divisions while advancing French strategic objectives. The imperial recess of 1803 represented the most comprehensive territorial reorganization in German history, as the systematic secularization of ecclesiastical territories and mediatization of smaller principalities eliminated over 100 political entities, while consolidating power in the hands of larger states. The process transferred approximately 3.2 million subjects and substantial territorial resources to enlarged kingdoms and duchies, creating simplified political arrangements that favored French interest. The formation of the Confederation of the Rhine on July 12, 1806, represented the culmination of Napoleon's systematic policy of German territorial reorganization, while providing the immediate cause for the Holy Roman Empire's dissolution. The Confederation's membership, initially including 16 German states led by Bavaria, Württemberg, and Baden, created a French-dominated alliance that controlled substantial Central European territories, while maintaining nominal independence from direct French administration. Emperor Francis II's abdication of the imperial title on August 6. The emperor's declaration, issued from Schönbrunn Palace, acknowledged the practical impossibility of maintaining imperial authority over territories that had withdrawn from imperial jurisdiction, while preserving Habsburg dignity through retention of the Austrian imperial title. The empire's final dissolution occurred without military resistance or popular protest, demonstrating the extent to which imperial authority had become irrelevant to German political life. The systematic transfer of imperial regalia to Vienna, where they would remain as historical artifacts rather than symbols of active authority, symbolized the transformation of medieval institutions into museum pieces. The Holy Roman Empire's end marked the conclusion of one of history's most remarkable political experiments, an institution that had survived for over a millennium through adaptation to changing circumstances, while maintaining continuity with its Carolingian origins. The empire's ultimate failure reflected not inherent weaknesses, but the revolutionary challenges of the early 19th century, when nationalism, popular sovereignty, and centralized administration created new forms of political organization that medieval federalism could not accommodate. The empire's legacy would endure in the constitutional traditions, legal systems, and cultural institutions that shaped Central European development for centuries. Its memory would inspire later attempts at German unification and European integration, while its example of unity and diversity would provide models for federal systems throughout the modern world. From Charlemagne's Christmas coronation to Francis II's quiet abdication, the Holy Roman Empire had demonstrated that political institutions could evolve and adapt while maintaining their essential character. Its thousand-year history proved that diversity and unity were not incompatible, that local autonomy and central authority could coexist, and that even the most complex political arrangements could endure when they served the genuine needs of their constituents. The empire that Voltaire dismissed as neither holy nor Roman nor an empire had been, in its own way, all three. It had been holy in its commitment to Christian values and universal peace. It had been Roman in its claims to imperial dignity and legal continuity. And it had been an empire in its scope, its ambitions, and its enduring influence on the course of human civilization. As the snow that had fallen on that Christmas morning in 800 finally melted into history, the Holy Roman Empire left behind not just memories of past glory, but lessons for future generations about the possibilities and limitations of human political achievement. Its story reminds us that even the greatest institutions are mortal, but also that their influence can outlive their existence by centuries. This has been Ancient Echoes. Until our next journey into the forgotten chapters of human history, remember that empires may fall, but the echoes of their achievements resonate through the ages, shaping the world we inhabit today.